Hello, everyone, and welcome to June Tips and Virtual Transition Times meeting. My name is Melissa Wyman, and I am PCR's Respite Care and Community Engagement Director. I will be your moderator this evening, so please feel free to send any questions or comments in the chat box below. We are so excited to be collaborating with Montgomery County Public Schools, MCPS, Transition Services Unit to provide an enhanced transition times program for transitioning youth, their families, and caregivers. We are delighted to offer this presentation with American Sign Language simultaneous interpretation. We will also be offering this presentation with Spanish simultaneous interpretation. To access the other interpretation services in Spanish, at the bottom of your screen, select Interpretation, select Spanish for the Spanish interpretation. Mute original audio if you only want to hear one language. The English and Spanish language versions will be archived on the PCR website Transition Times page. Just some Zoom tip reminders. We are using the webinar platform. We will wait for questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free to submit any of your questions in the chat box below. Click Show Captions to see the captions for the webinar. You must select the speaking language you would like to show. We are also very happy to welcome a participant tonight, Perry Briskin. Perry Briskin is the Deputy Secretary for Healthcare Finance and Director of Maryland Medicaid. In this role, she leads policy, operation, and financing across the state's largest public program. Previously, Perry served as a senior advisor to the director at the Center for Medicaid and CHIP Services at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services of the United States. Thank you, Perry, for being here tonight.
Thank you so much. Would you like me to dive in now?
Sure,
When you
yes.
want me. Okay, good. Good evening, everyone. Happy Wednesday. And thank you all so much for having me. Yes, my name is Perry. I am the Maryland Medicaid Director. And so I oversee our Maryland Medicaid program, which in total is about 1.5 million individuals, half of all children in the state, 40% of all births. But very importantly for today, our home and community-based services waivers, which makes up about 30,000 individuals of that 1.5 million. And since I started in this role last August, and anyone that has spoken to me, number one on my list has been how do I make better our eligibility and enrollment processes in our home and community-based services waivers. It is we acknowledge, an incredibly complicated process for our members, our families, our providers, and I will say, frankly, for our staff to navigate. We have built quite the complicated system in Maryland. And so I knew when I came in, it was going to be one of my goals to make it better for people, make it easier to navigate, and make it so that people didn't have to submit requests for information as often or wait as long to hear back when they had a question or were waiting to hear about the status of their application or redetermination. Now, I will say, almost a year in, we have made progress behind the scenes that I truly hope people on this call will start to see very soon. We've made technology processes. We're in the process of hiring new staff for this division, which was grossly understaffed, just 20 people to do all of the financial review for all 30,000 individuals, plus new applications. And we've been updating our communications. As some folks on this call know, we've been putting out new training decks, creating new training materials, both internally and externally. So really trying from almost a 360-degree approach of how to make this process better. But we also acknowledge change is not overnight, especially when it's government. And so I just want to acknowledge the stress and complexity of this system that you are all trying to navigate for your loved ones, for those that you care for. I know coming up is a very important date. It's the end of the fiscal year, which also means the date when many young people, what we call the transitional youth, age out of some waivers and go to another waiver, often to the community pathways waiver. We are currently trying to prioritize those individuals as much as possible. And I will say, if you have, and this is an impromptu request to PCR, but I assume the majority of the people on this call have children who are transitioning to a different waiver this year. And if that is the case, we have lists internally, but I have been starting to ask people to send us their names so we can make sure we have you on your list, our list. And I want to make sure that we're addressing this up front and minimizing any gaps in coverage, or ideally having no gaps in coverage. And so after this PCR, I will ask you from this webinar, if your child is going through a transitional youth period, um, this session, please give your name. And it's helpful if we have your child, your date of birth, any ID number that they have to us, and we can just make sure we're tracking them and that we have your paperwork. So on July 1st, or as close to July 1st, we have that paperwork. Um, so you're in terrific hands with Michael, I know today. Um, and I would say so I'm just looking at the chat in real time. So Howard, send it to either Steve Riley or someone from
You
PCR.
can send it to me. I'll put my address.
Thank you.
Yep. And then everybody can send it to me and then I'll put it together and send it to you.
Yes. And then so Nina, it is an annual headache. One thing that we are doing, just to give you a sense of what we're trying to do to make it less of a headache, is we're trying to do more automatic renewals. So what data do we have access to that can make it so you have to do no paperwork every year, that we just check data behind the scenes? And I will say we do this for non-disabled individuals. We have not been doing, for reasons that I do and don't understand, auto renewals for Maryland, but we are turning those on for the HCBS population. And we're hoping that moving forward, far fewer people will have to do any paperwork. It will just be automatic with data that is already in our system. And Ariel, I hear you. I agree with you. It is a nightmare. We are trying to make government work. And then the semi-annual redetermination requirement. We are no longer getting notices for NIDA. Can't use the website. So the semi-annual redetermination requirement is only applicable to non-disabled adults. If you are a person with disabilities, or if you're a person who is on one of our home and community-based services waivers, nothing is changing for you. I assume when you're saying semi-annual, it's the every 6 months redeterminations that was passed as part of the big bill last year. That does not apply, I think, to many of the people impacted by our waiver services. So I do want to make that clear. And we have a lot of information on our website. We have a screener on our website where you can go and check to see, do these changes apply to me? So I know there are, yes, Michael, I agree. I'm sorry, I'm reading things in real time.
Yeah, but we don't need to do, so we just
Yeah,
wanted you
yeah.
to introduce, I don't want you to think you have to answer. I think that, that answer any of these things. So,
Yeah.
in
I
the
would
chat,
just
yeah.
say, send your questions to PCR. They can collect them after this. We can get back to you on it. Send us your names if you're transitioning. And just, we are trying to make ourselves more accessible. PCR, Steve knows how to get in touch with me. So please reach out, and we just really appreciate you. And we so deeply care about our members, and want to make this easier for everyone. So just thank you for your patience with us as we make these improvements. And with that, I will stop and turn it to the real stars of this
Thank you so
hour.
much,
But yeah, thank you
Perry.
for having me.
Thank you. All right. And now we will switch it over to Michael. me. All right.
Now, Melissa, I have not received the email with the PowerPoint, so let's adjust this. And if Margie or you could show and advance the slides, that would
Okay.
be great.
Okay. Margie, can you? Yes.
And while Margie is getting the slide deck up, I just want to say now I am no apple polisher, but I do have to say I have worked with a number of Medicaid directors in the state of Maryland. Um, and Perry is very different. So when you think Medicaid director, works for state government, used to work for federal government, that is not usually a recipe for someone being highly helpful, responsive, and receptive. But Perry breaks that mold and gives me great cause for hope that this system will be improved. Um, so, I'd like to start with a joke. So there's a 95-year-old Italian man who's lying on his deathbed and he's fading fast. But suddenly he smells his favorite aroma in the world, homemade ravioli simmering in homemade sauce. And the scent revives him a little, and he manages to crawl out of bed and stumble down the hallway into the kitchen. And sure enough, there on the stove is a pot of homemade ravioli simmering in homemade sauce. And he's delighted. And he grabs a fork. And he's just about to to spear a ravioli when suddenly he's whacked on the hand with a wooden spoon. And he turns and he looks into his wife's glaring face and she yells at him, "That's not for you. That's for the wake." And it kind of highlights the fact that just sometimes, just when you think that you've survived a great ordeal and you can kind of coast a little bit, maybe enjoy yourself, the world may have other ideas for you. So many of you may have had to wait possibly years, fight long and hard for your loved ones to get services through the Community Pathways Medicaid waiver, through the Developmental Disabilities Administration or DDA. But just when you got those services and thought you could coast, you were faced with another big challenge, which is the annual redeterminations of eligibility. Now, these didn't used to be as big a challenge as they are now. I realize that everybody blames the pandemic for almost everything. But in this case, it was a clear and very understandable reason for what's happened since then. During the pandemic, um, there was a federal law that required states to keep everybody on Medicaid for several years throughout the period of the so-called public health emergency. Um, Even people who were no longer eligible, who lost eligibility, had to remain on Medicaid. And nobody was getting redeterminations of eligibility until the public health emergency was over. And then every state had to do redeterminations of eligibility for everybody on Medicaid, including lots of people who were no longer eligible. And they had to do them all within a period of 14 months. It was a Herculean task. It was beyond the capacity of any state. And that set the stage for every state Medicaid agency being overwhelmed, understaffed. A lot of staff left, a lot in frustration because of the overwhelm they faced. So that's the background. Now, the good news is we have Perry, and also I'm going to give you instructions on how to navigate these Medicaid waiver redeterminations as successfully as possible and how to get help if you run into problems. This is designed to be somewhat interactive. I like to intersperse some mainly true-false questions throughout the presentation. Please go ahead and just type an answer, a true or false, into the chat when these come up. It's not a test. Nobody's going to notice if you don't get it right. But I just like to keep you engaged a bit because the material is not sexy. All right, next slide, please. So what's a Medicaid waiver redetermination? Why does it matter? So I suppose most of you are familiar with the idea of a Medicaid waiver program, but I'll just kind of summarize it. A Medicaid waiver program is for certain groups of people with disabilities who get Medicaid to be able to receive services in the community as an alternative to getting services in an institution. In the case of the Community Pathways Waiver, which is the largest waiver program in Maryland, and that serves people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, that that program provides services in the community like residential supports, supported employment, and a number of others. As an alternative to institutions like, there are only two of them left in Maryland, Potomac Center in Western Maryland, and in Salisbury on the Eastern Shore, the Holly Center. But there used to be others, the Rosewood Center, Great Oak Center. So Medicaid waiver programs are great because they provide oftentimes more services and more intensive services in the community than Medicaid usually provides, but they're just for a limited number of people. That's how they keep a cap on the costs. But in order to be enrolled in one of these waiver programs, especially the Community Pathways Waiver, which is one of 6 waiver programs we have in Maryland, a person does have to qualify for Medicaid, and they have to get a redetermination of eligibility, generally every year. So you have to have Medicaid, and generally every year, you have to go through a redetermination to make sure you're still eligible for Medicaid and for the Medicaid waiver program. So if you don't go through a redetermination, then there are serious consequences. If you don't complete the redetermination, or if you do the redetermination and it shows you're no longer eligible, or if you submit your redetermination information, but for whatever reason it's not processed, then you can lose your Medicaid and your Medicaid waiver services. So that's an extremely severe consequence. Next slide, please. All right, your first true-false question. Everyone enrolled in a Medicaid waiver gets a redetermination the same way. True or false? Okay, I think we got a lot of ringers in here. Most people are answering the same way. I do see some diversity of opinion, but the correct answer is the most popular one, and that is false. Next slide, please. So the way that you get a redetermination for Medicaid and Medicaid waiver is based on how you get Medicaid. So that implies that there's more than one way to get Medicaid, and indeed there is. Next slide. All right. There are 60 different ways to get Medicaid in Maryland, but only a handful are compatible with Medicaid waiver programs. True or false? As far as I'm concerned, you get extra credit for putting yourself out there, typing an answer into the chat, whether or not it's the correct one. Okay, I'm seeing lots of people, most people answering true. And next slide, please. It is, in fact, true. So there are actually 60 different ways to get Medicaid in the state of Maryland. There are more ways to get Medicaid than there are ways to leave your lover. I'm dating myself a little bit with the old Paul Simon song, but in any case, each way to get Medicaid, each pathway to Medicaid is called a coverage group or an eligibility group, generally called a coverage group in Maryland. And out of those 60 different coverage groups that exist in Maryland, just a handful of them are compatible with the waiver. So you can be getting Medicaid in any one of a handful of coverage groups and meet the Medicaid eligibility requirement to be in and stay in the waiver program. Next slide. So there are 7 Medicaid coverage groups that I'm going to focus on now. They are, I believe, the most common ones for people in the Community Pathways waiver to use, and some are much more common than others. There are several other Medicaid coverage groups that are compatible with the Community Pathways waiver, but in my experience, they're so rare that I didn't find it worthwhile to cover them here. They're so rare for people in the waiver to be using. In fact, I don't think I've known anyone in this waiver who used one of the other several groups other than the 7 I'm about to show you. So I'm referring to the Community Pathways Medicaid waiver. Some of you may have family members who were enrolled in the Community Supports waiver or the Family Supports waiver. Those waivers no longer exist because they were rolled into, they were combined into the Community Pathways waiver in October of last year. So if you're thinking, well, my relative is in community supports or family supports, they used to be, but now they're in Community Pathways. So I'll go through this fairly quickly. The first Medicaid coverage group that's worth mentioning is the SSI group. Anybody who receives supplemental security income, SSI for short, which is a cash benefit from Social Security for people with disabilities, will be automatically and immediately eligible for Medicaid. And I've noted the code here for each of these 7 Medicaid coverage groups. Each Medicaid group has a code that starts with a single letter and a 2-digit number. And for the SSI group, that's S02. Before I go any further, another point worth mentioning. One rule for bureaucrats and government officials who are trying to confuse the public is give some benefits more than one name. That keeps everyone off balance. So in every state has a Medicaid program, But a number of states, including Maryland, give it another name as well. And in Maryland, we call it medical assistance. So Medicaid equals medical assistance. They are one and the same in the state of Maryland. Now, another rule for bureaucrats and government officials trying to confuse the public is to give very different benefits, very similar names. So we have Medicaid and we have Medicare, which is really beyond the scope of today's training. But although Medicaid and Medicare sound very much alike, they are very different benefits. So if you're trying to keep score here, Medicaid equals medical assistance, but that's different from Medicare. So the first coverage group that's going to be important is SSI. So if your family member receives SSI payments from Social Security, the maximum benefit is generally $994 a month, but many people get less. Then the person receiving SSI is automatically eligible for Medicaid, otherwise known as medical assistance. The second group, a little more complicated. It's for disabled adult children, known as DACs for short. Now, this group is for people who started out getting SSI, but then they were switched from SSI to a different cash benefit from Social Security, known as a disabled adult child or DAC benefit. Why did they get switched? Because the individual is an adult, at least 18 years old. Their disability started before age 22. And they have a parent who is now getting Social Security retirement, or the parent is getting Social Security disability, or the parent is deceased. If all those conditions are met, then the adult with a disability can start getting a Social Security benefit that's based on their parents' earnings record. And generally, that benefit will be high enough that it will cause them to no longer be eligible for SSI. Their income would be too high for them to get any SSI any longer. And ordinarily, you would think, well, if they lose SSI, then they're going to lose the Medicaid that comes along with it. But that's where this DAC coverage group comes into play. It says, if you started out on SSI, you were switched to a DAC benefit, and you lost your SSI as a result, you can still keep your Medicaid, so long as you would otherwise be eligible for SSI if you didn't have the DAC benefit. So it's a nice protection to continue Medicaid for people who've made that switch. And the code for the DAC Medicaid is S19. The third group is my second favorite. It's called 1619B. You'll notice it has the same code as SSI, S02. And this is a group for people who started out on getting SSI payments. They went to work, and their earnings from work increased high enough that they reduced the person's SSI payment to zero. And again, you wonder, if they lose the SSI, do they lose the Medicaid? And this so-called 1619B group, by the way, 1619B is just the section of the Social Security law that enacted this provision. That group enables people who have essentially worked their way off SSI payments to keep their Medicaid. And if you're not familiar with 1619B, I'm going to take just a slight detour here and tell you a little bit more about it. If your family member gets SSI, 1619B provides them with protection such that they have nothing to lose working full time. If they earn enough through full-time work to reduce their SSI to zero, they can remain eligible for SSI, even though they're not getting the payments. That does two things: lets them keep their Medicaid, and if anything happens to their earnings later, if they stop working for any reason or their earnings drop low enough, they can get the SSI back just by contacting Social Security. They don't have to reapply and start over again. So they're going to have more money working and earning enough to reduce the SSI to zero than they would if they earned less. They can keep their Medicaid. They can go right back on SSI if they need it later, and there's no time limit to that rule. So if your family member gets SSI, just remember that that rule means there's no reason for them not to work full time if they're able and willing to do that. Next slide. Group number 4 is called the Adult Magi group. Magi stands for Modified Adjusted Gross Income. That was a term that was used very heavily when the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, began to make massive changes to the public healthcare system back in 2014. And this is a group that does not require a person to be disabled. The first 3 groups that we looked at and the last 3 we'll be looking at all require a person to have a significant disability. The Adult Magi group does not require that. And most people in this group are not disabled, although people with disabilities may qualify for it as well. Perry had alluded to this group a little earlier in her remarks. So this group is also known as the Medicaid expansion. Medicaid was expanded to cover a lot of childless adults who are 19 to 64 years old, had families with low incomes. And for example, for a single unmarried person with no children, the income limit is $1,836 a month this year. And this is the group that was targeted by the big bill that passed last year that has increased work requirements, twice a year eligibility redeterminations rather than the usual once a year. Someone had asked about the twice a year redeterminations. That only applies to this coverage group. Number 5 is my favorite. This is called the Employed Individuals with Disabilities, or EID program. And this is a Medicaid coverage group only for people with disabilities who are working for pay and meet a few other conditions. So this would be for people who are working for pay, have a significant disability, and don't qualify for Medicaid another way. And it's my favorite, partly because it incentivizes work, it encourages people to work. You actually have to be working to get Medicaid this way. And also partly because its financial limits are way more generous than for other Medicaid groups for people with disabilities. It is the only group that has no income limit at all. Used to, until a couple of years ago, no longer has an income limit at all. And it has a much higher asset limit than other Medicaid groups for people with disabilities. Number 6 is the special waiver group. This one it goes by a variety of different names that I'll refer to momentarily. But this is a group that's only for people in a Medicaid waiver program like the Community Pathways waiver. And it has a limit on income of 3 times the maximum SSI benefit. Maximum SSI this year for a single person is $994 a month. 3 times that is $2,982 a month. And it has a limit on resources or assets of $2,500. Now, although this is called the special waiver group, it's a myth that a person has to be getting Medicaid through this group to be enrolled in the Community Pathways waiver. A person can be using any of the 7 groups that we're discussing here in order to get their Medicaid and still be in the Community Pathways waiver. The special waiver group is simply kind of the fallback option for people in the waiver who don't qualify for one of the others. Next slide, please. And the 7th and last one is kind of a temporary one. This was created for people who started out on SSI and they were enrolled in the waiver and they lost eligibility for SSI for a non-medical reason, meaning they didn't lose it because their disability literally improved medically, but they lost it for another reason, which is generally a financial reason. And then they stay in that 7th group temporarily while they reapply for the waiver within 90 days of losing the SSI eligibility. And they may potentially be eligible for one of the other groups. Okay, now I tried to be merciful to you and not load this PowerPoint to an absurd size. So in addition to having received the PowerPoint in an email, you should have also received a Word document that has a lot more detail. It lists the 7 Medicaid coverage groups and goes into a lot more detail about who is eligible for each. So you can look that up in the other document. Next slide, please. So a person who's enrolled in Medicaid through any of those 7 groups does need to go through redeterminations. And the last group, the one that's temporary, just for somebody who's in the waiver, loses their SSI and then needs to reapply and try to get Medicaid another way. For the other 6 groups, person generally needs a redetermination once a year. But there are some exceptions. Also, as the first question, first true-false question highlighted, people don't all get their redeterminations the same way. Depending on which Medicaid coverage group a person is enrolled in, they may be getting their redetermination of eligibility from any of several agencies. So if somebody receives SSI payments, they actually don't get a redetermination from the state. They get eligibility redeterminations by Social Security. And as long as Social Security determines the person is still eligible for SSI payments, then they'll continue to get Medicaid and the state of Maryland will continue their Medicaid. So that one's pretty straightforward. However, the frequency of the redeterminations for people on SSI can vary. It can be as frequent as once a year or as infrequent as every 5 or 6 years, depending on the person's circumstances. If Social Security thinks it's highly unlikely that the person may no longer be eligible for SSI, they may only do the redeterminations once every 5 or 6 years. If they think that a person's eligibility could change, particularly if the person is working, they may do those redeterminations every year. The disabled adult children group, redeterminations, Social Security should have a role in them, and the Department of Social Services, the local agency that handles redeterminations of eligibility for most Medicaid coverage groups that are based on disability. They do those redeterminations. They are supposed to happen annually. 1619B, that's the group for people who've worked their way off SSI payments through paid work. Social Security does annual redeterminations for those, and the Department of Social Services kind of tags along with the decision that Social Security makes. Number 4, the adult magi group, the Medicaid expansion for people that don't have to have a disability. That's done by a completely different entity. That's the marylandhealthconnection.gov website. Number 5, the employed individuals with disabilities group. That's done by yet another entity. It's the Eligibility Determination Division, EDD for short, and it's their EID unit. So they are a unit within the Medicaid state agency that handles eligibility for the EID group. The special waiver group is also handled by the Eligibility Determination Division, but it's by a different unit within that division called the waiver unit. And then finally, number 7, people who lost SSI while they were enrolled in the waiver and then need to transition to a different Medicaid group. The EDD waiver unit handles their reapplications as well. Next slide, please. All right, so I've talked a lot here. I'm going to give you another true-false question. A person's coverage group appears on their medical assistance or Medicaid card. Is that true or false? Okay, think about another 10 seconds. Okay, thank you to those of you who answered. My favorite answer was, I wish that were true. And so do I. Next slide, please. Yeah, in fact, that is false. It would be very helpful if you could just look at your loved one's medical assistance card and see which coverage group they were enrolled in, but you can't. Luckily, there are other ways to determine which coverage group a person has. And this is going to be very important for a number of reasons that we'll be highlighting throughout the rest of this training. So what are the 3 ways that you can figure out which coverage group your family member is enrolled in if they have medical assistance? Well, if your family member is in the Community Pathways waiver, then you can ask the Coordinator of Community Services, the CCS provider, to look it up in their system. They have access to an online system called LTSS, which stands for Long-Term Services and Supports. And that does give them the opportunity to find out which coverage group your family member is enrolled in. Or you can ask any service provider, medical, or one of the DDA providers who serve your family member, you can ask them if they are billing Medicaid for their services. They have access to something called the Eligibility Verification System, or EVS, and that will show what your family member's coverage group is. If neither of those options is available to you, or you can't get the information you need, there is a phone number you can call. I just found out about this option last year, and there's an automated system. You select option 2, and either your family member, the individual with a disability, or their authorized representative, that could be you, um, should call, and you can call with your family member together. And when you get through to a live person, you'll need your family member's medical assistance number or their social security number. And then you can say you want to know what their Medicaid code is. And just to be sure they know what you mean by Medicaid code, you can say, well, it's a single letter followed by a 2-digit number, like SSI's code is S02. And then they should be able to tell you. Okay. And Nina, I see. Why do we need to know this? You will find out as we go through the rest of the training. One reason that I've already touched on is the fact that if you know which coverage group your family member is enrolled in, then you'll know who is supposed to do their redetermination. Okay. And you'll know who is not supposed to do their redetermination, which is an issue we'll get to a little later. Next slide, please. Now, I'm told that sometimes different sections of the long-term services and supports, or LTSS system, may have conflicting information about a person's Medicaid eligibility. So if that's the case, then you may want to use one of the other 2 options to verify the Medicaid coverage group for your family member. And the pretty much the remainder of this presentation is going to focus on Medicaid redeterminations for people in the special waiver group. That's the one Medicaid coverage group that is only for people in the waiver. The other groups can be used by people who are in the waiver or not. Special waiver group is only for people in the waiver, but remember, you do not have to be in the special waiver group to be in the waiver. You can be in any of the 7 groups where we've discussed and be enrolled in the Community Pathways waiver. But the special waiver group is the only one that is only available to people in the waiver. And the reason we're going to focus on those eligibility redeterminations is that those have been the focus of the greatest difficulties over the last several years. Next slide. So following that rule for bureaucrats trying to confuse the public, the special waiver group does go by other names. It's known as the special income level group, or the 300% SSI income level group, referring to the fact that the maximum income, the income limit, is 3 times the maximum SSI benefit amount. And sometimes it's known as the optional group. Next slide. So what are some eligibility criteria for the special waiver group? Here's a true-false question for you. The special waiver group has the same disability standard as Social Security does, an income limit of 3 times the maximum SSI benefit, namely $2,982 a month this year, and a resource or asset limit of $2,500. Is that true or false? Okay, very good. So the most popular answer was true. And we're ready for the next slide, please. And true is correct. So a person has to have a severe disability that's lasted or is expected to last at least 12 months, or it's a terminal illness. And it limits the person's ability to work, doesn't necessarily prevent them from working, but it poses some limits to their work ability. That's the same thing as Social Security's disability standard. And the person has to have limited income and limited resources. So let me pause for a moment and tell you the difference between income and resources. They're both kinds of money, but they're different kinds of money. I have a trainer friend who likes to say, income is what you get and resources are what you got. So if a person gets money during a calendar month, that's considered income. If they have any of that money left over when the first day of the next calendar month begins, that remaining amount that carried over into the next month becomes a resource. And it remains a resource for as long as they have it. So, resources might be money in your bank account, for example, that you've had since at least the previous month or earlier. So there's a limit on income, money that you receive during a calendar month, and there's a separate limit on resources, money you still have left over after the month you received it. And by the way, the resource limit for this special waiver Medicaid group is now $2,500. And some of you might be thinking, I thought it was 2,000. And it was. It used to be the resource limit was only $2,000. They changed it. They increased it kind of on the sly. It wasn't well advertised. July 1st of last year, it went up from $2,000 to $2,500. Next slide. So how do you know how much of a person's income counts against the income limit and how much of their resources count against the resource limit? It is important to know that not all income and resources count or count equally. So the way that the Eligibility Determination Division's waiver unit that handles eligibility for this special waiver Medicaid group, the way that they interpret the rules, almost all of so-called unearned income is countable. That would include Social Security disability benefits, pensions, annuities, interest, dividends, other government benefits, unemployment, workers' compensation, veterans benefits, and a bunch of others. They count almost all of that money against the income limit, but they count less than half of earned income. And earned income is just money that you got as direct compensation for work you did. That would be wages, self-employment income, tips, salaries, royalties if you sold a movie script or something like that. Direct compensation for work performed is earned income, and pretty much everything else is considered unearned income. But very importantly, less than half of earned income counts against that income limit, which means you can be earning significantly more than the income limit if all of your income is coming from paid work, because less than half of it will count. Now, resources, remember the resource limit is $2,500. Most resources do count against that limit, including cash, bank accounts, stocks, bonds, CDs, money markets, retirement accounts, other kinds of investments, real estate other than the home that you live in, those all count against that $2,500 limit. But there are some key types of resources that don't count against that limit. And I wish I had more time to talk about those because they're very important. But some key ones are your primary home. You can own it free and clear with no mortgage. It can be worth $1 million. It still does not count against the $2,500 limit. Cars that you own don't count. ABLE accounts, special accounts owned by people with disabilities that enable people to save money and go over the resource limit because the money in those accounts does not count against the resource limits. Special needs trusts, I think most of you have heard of. Special accounts set up to benefit a person with a disability, but the person with a disability doesn't own the money in the trust and they don't control it. That doesn't count. Certain burial funds and a few others. So there are some key types of resources that don't count against that limit. Heidi, retirement accounts generally do count. They do count for the special waiver Medicaid group, but hope I won't confuse anyone here. For the employed individuals with disabilities or EID group, retirement accounts do not count against the resource limit for that group. Okay, that was a good question. Thank you, Heidi. Next slide, please. So how is a redetermination supposed to work for the special waiver group? And then we're going to go through common problems that people have encountered with redeterminations for the special waiver group, departures from the way they're supposed to work, and some strategies you can use to help prevent those problems or to remedy them. So what's supposed to happen, and let me stop again and just repeat what I'm discussing here. I'm not talking about redeterminations for any of the other 6 Medicaid coverage groups that I listed that are compatible with the Community Pathways waiver. I'm only talking about the redetermination process for people in the special waiver group. So if your family member is in the Community Pathways waiver and they're getting Medicaid through SSI or the Employed Individuals with Disabilities program or the Disabled Adult Child group, what I'm going to cover in the next number of slides does not apply to your family member. They're getting their redetermination another way. And those redeterminations have not been as problematic nearly as those for people in the special waiver group. And that's why I'm focused on that. So persons enrolled in the special waiver group, they're in the Community Pathways waiver once a year. They need to get a redetermination of eligibility for their special waiver Medicaid group and their eligibility for the Community Pathways waiver. Okay. So what's supposed to happen is the individual with a disability or their authorized representative is supposed to get a notice or a letter in the mail about 2 months and 10 days before the due date for their eligibility redetermination. And that notice, that letter, includes a PIN number, a personal ID number, that needs to be used for the person to be able to complete the redetermination online using the marylandbenefits.gov online system. It used to be called MyMDThink, but it's still the same system. And that's the preferred way for people to do redeterminations. So if you have online access, and can do the redetermination using marylandbenefits.gov, that's the way to go. But you need that PIN number in order to be able to do it. Now, get the notice, then you complete the redetermination, ideally online. But very importantly, and I did not learn this until not all that long ago, although you're going to be tempted to do it as soon as possible just to avoid any problems and be proactive, you cannot do it more than 45 days before the due date, or it won't go through. So I put that in all caps to really underscore that point. So you're going to get the redetermination letter in the mail about 70 days before the due date, but then you need to wait another 25 days at least until you're within 45 days, a month and a half of the due date, and then go ahead and complete the redetermination online. Now, there will be a second notice that comes in the mail about 55 days before the due date that has the PIN number as well and a paper application. So the paper application is designed for people who don't have online access or for whatever reason are not going to complete their redetermination online. They're going to do it in hard copy, do it on the paper application, which is the backup option. But the preferred one is to use the online system. Okay, next slide, please. So if the redetermination is not completed online, then you complete the paper redetermination packet and either mail it or deliver it to the Eligibility Determination Division, and their address in Baltimore is at the top of slide 24. Now, if the Eligibility Determination Division, EDD for short, needs additional documentation to verify identity, income, resources, etc., then they will send a notice, a letter to the individual or authorized representative and request the additional documents. And then obviously the person who receives that notice will return the documents as quickly as possible. If the person is determined eligible, they'll get an approval notice within 45 days. And that's also uploaded into the long-term services and support system, the online system that the coordinator of community services has access to. So if for some reason you don't get the letter in the mail, maybe you moved, maybe there's a problem with it being lost in the mail, you can check with your CCS and ask them to look in LTSS and see if there's an approval notice. Now, if the person is determined not eligible, their income is over the limit, their resources are over the limit, whatever, then they'll get a denial notice, which is also uploaded into the LTSS system. So the CCS can tell you whether you were approved or denied, or whether there's been no decision on your redetermination yet. And that's supposed to happen within 45 days. Next slide. Now, if you're denied, you're determined not eligible any longer, you can appeal that. You can request a fair hearing to appeal it. And I put this last point in bold because if you request the hearing within 10 days of the date on the denial notice or the postmark on the denial notice envelope, whichever is later, then enrollment in the waiver and Medicaid are supposed to continue pending the result of the hearing. So even if you're denied, you can continue to get your Medicaid and your waiver services pending the result of the hearing if you request the hearing, you appeal quickly enough. And if you're wondering, well, what happens if I don't get the letter quickly enough to meet that 10-day deadline? And we will be covering that a little bit later. We do have an option. Next slide. So that is how redeterminations for the special waiver group are supposed to happen. But there are often problems with them, and I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. The accompanying Word document that you received in the email goes into deeper detail about each of these problems and the fixes that go along with them. So the first problem is the individual or their authorized representative did not get the redetermination notice, did not get the letter that says, here's your PIN number, your redetermination is due such and such a date, here's what to do. Or if they got it, they didn't open it, didn't read it, didn't understand it. So what can you do? One thing you can do is be proactive and open an online account. Now, I know I referred to this system as the online system for doing your redeterminations as marylandbenefits.gov, but in fact, the URL for it is not marylandbenefits.gov, it's benefits.maryland.gov. So go into benefits.maryland.gov, make sure you have an account. If you don't, then open one and check the address that's in there and make sure it's accurate. If you've moved, if the address is simply erroneous, there's an error in it, go ahead and fix it to help make sure that you get the letter, the notice in the mail notifying you of the redeterminations. Okay. Now, your service providers through DDA and your coordinators of community services should also be letting you know to expect these letters and should be able to give you an estimate of when your redetermination may be due. But the CCS also, in their long-term services and support system, that online system, they get electronic alerts letting them know when your redetermination is due. And they get them 90 days, 60 days, and 30 days before the redetermination is due. So you can tell your CCS, can you please let me know when you get a notice, when you get an alert in LTSS that my redetermination is due. And the CCS should be informing the individual or their authorized representative. Next slide. So the second problem is difficulty using marylandbenefits.gov, or more accurately referred to as benefits.maryland.gov. And one issue is people don't have the PIN number. So keep an eye out for the redetermination notice. That's got the PIN number in it. But remember, your coordinator of community services also gets that same notice, that same letter in LTSS. So if you don't get the letter, contact your CCS and ask them, can you see if my redetermination notice is in there? I didn't get it. And if it's in there, ask them for the PIN number. And then you can use that to go into the benefits.maryland.gov site and do the redetermination. Okay. Now, if you try everything and you don't get the PIN, or you don't want to or can't for some reason complete the redetermination online, then go ahead and complete the paper application. Next slide. So how do you submit the paper packet? If you mail it, I recommend mailing it certified, request a return receipt. That will give you proof that not only you sent it, but somebody signed for it. So somebody at the eligibility determination division actually received it. Some people deliver it. Some people drive from Montgomery County or farther to Baltimore to hand deliver that redetermination packet because they want to be absolutely sure that there's no doubt that it's received. You do want to make sure that the person with a disability or the authorized representative signs the application. And if you're doing the paper application, then make a copy of it, probably make 2 copies of it. Keep one for yourself and give one to the CCS, the Coordinator of Community Services, and they can upload it into the LTSS system. And that's kind of a backup way of making sure it's even more likely that EDD will receive it. Next slide. Now, then there's follow-up. So you want to wait 30 days after the application is submitted, either online or by, having mailed or delivered it. And then somebody should be contacting the eligibility determination division to verify it was received, see if they need any additional documents. Just don't leave it to chance. The consequences of potentially losing Medicaid and waiver services are too dire to not be aggressive about your follow-up. Now, EDD and the Developmental Disabilities Administration kind of collaborated on a training for coordinators of community services on this issue. And they said, please have only one person do the follow-up, which does sound reasonable. And you can certainly try that. However, although the problems have been reportedly easing a bit more recently, there can still be problems in getting through to someone at the eligibility determination division. People not returning calls, not responding to emails. So some people choose to just have multiple people try to contact them, try to contact EDD to verify the application was received, it's in process, see if they need anything else. Throw everyone at the wall and see who sticks. Just keep trying to reach them until you get through because it's that important. If you email the case manager, the eligibility worker at EDD, you can email their email address, which should be in the notice, and you can copy a general email address that starts with MDH and that appears on slide 29. And you can try calling the EDD case manager as well. Their phone number should also be in the notice. And there's a general customer service phone number also listed on slide 29. So this is often the most important step to make sure you don't run into problems with getting approved, is just follow up and make sure everything that's needed is received and processed. Next slide, please. So, what if you do not get a response from the EDD case manager? I have provided you with managers at the eligibility determination division. There's a unit supervisor, a lead worker, an assistant director of quality, and the director, known as the deputy director for eligibility, the director of EDD. Their phone numbers, their email addresses, and I even gave you one cell phone number there. These also appear, this contact information also appears in the Word document. So if you can't get through to one person, try everybody else if need be. Next slide. So problem number 4, you submitted the redetermination packet, but EDD replies and says, we need more documentation. Well, how do you deal with that problem? Well, one way is to try to make sure they have everything they need along with your application, rather than only providing some of it or none of it and waiting for them to ask for it. So there is a list on the first page of the redetermination application that lists all of the documents that are needed along with the application to verify income and resources and other details. So read that list carefully and try to provide everything you can. And if you're uncertain about whether a particular document should be submitted, you can ask the CCS or possibly your service provider through DDA for guidance. If EDD does ask for more documentation, there are instructions in the Word document that accompanies this PowerPoint in the email. There's a section called Problems with Medicaid Waiver Redeterminations and How to Deal with Them. And there's more detail about problem number 4 in there. Next slide. Okay. The 5th problem, probably not going to be an issue for most or any of you, but it has been an issue for some people, so I wanted to mention it, is that sometimes the service provider will complete the redetermination rather than the individual or their authorized representative. And then if EDD sends a notice, a letter to the individual or the authorized representative saying, we need more information for your redetermination, the person has no idea what it's about because they're not the one who submitted the redetermination. So if the service provider completes the redetermination, they need to let the individual, their authorized representative, generally a family member, know and tell you, look, it's possible you're going to get letters regarding this. We submitted the redetermination. Okay, next slide. Number 6, you submitted the redetermination, but you did not get a notice telling you the result. That may mean that the redetermination was not processed, even though you did your part and submitted everything. So one thing you can do to help prevent that from happening is, and again, all caps in bold, don't submit the redetermination packet more than 45 days before the due date. But 45 days or very soon thereafter is fine. Okay. If it's submitted more than 45 days in advance, the system doesn't recognize it, it doesn't get processed. Now, if you don't get a notice, you can ask the CCS, can you look in your system, long-term services and supports, LTSS, and see if there's a decision notice in there? Because they may get it even if you didn't receive it in the mail. Now, if for whatever reason even though you submitted your redetermination packet on time, did everything you were supposed to do, if for any reason EDD does not process it on time, then the individual's Medicaid and waiver services may very well be terminated. So this step is critically important. If termination occurs, then work with the CCS, and if necessary, ask the CCS to contact DDA and contact the Eligibility Determination Division, EDD, and work to have the termination reversed. That has often been successful in the past when people have been incorrectly terminated. Next slide. So if your waiver eligibility is terminated incorrectly, you absolutely want to appeal. And the appeal is called requesting a fair hearing. Every unfavorable notice, every denial notice that's sent about Medicaid is accompanied by instructions for requesting a fair hearing. And again, this is a very important point. If you appeal within 10 days of the date on the notice, you request a hearing within 10 days of the date on the letter, then Medicaid and the waiver services will continue pending the result of the appeal. And the 10 days is the later of the date on the letter or the postmark on the envelope that the letter was received in. Now, what if the date on the letter and the date of the postmark is 9 days before you got the notice in the mail? Well, obviously, that doesn't give you enough time to appeal quickly enough. So what you should do then is, next slide, please, is explain this in your hearing request. I did not get the notice until such and such a date. This was the date on the notice. This was the postmark date. Give them screenshots or photos or whatever to prove that, and say, I want my Medicaid and my waiver services to continue pending the outcome of the hearing. Now, if your service provider, your DDA service provider providing the residential services, the supported employment or whatever, if they are a member of the professional association for service providers through DDA, which is called MACS, the Maryland Association of Community Services, then the service provider can ask MACS for help resolving the incorrect termination as a last resort. But it's really important to pull out all the stops if you're terminated and do everything possible to get that corrected, because service providers have had so many people incorrectly terminated, and they have no longer been able to bill for services to those folks, that a number of them have had to actually suspend services to a person until the waiver eligibility gets resolved. Next slide. Now, there is a new law in Maryland that will take effect October 1st. And it says, okay, if the state incorrectly terminated somebody from the waiver on or after January 1st of 2024, and it was clearly not the fault of the individual. They submitted all the paperwork, they did everything they were required to do, and they did it on time. So the fault was the state's. Then then this law requires the state to reinstate Medicaid and waiver services for that person and then have them complete the redetermination. So it's kind of a do-over. I did have somebody ask me, well, what's the enforcement for this? Is there anything in the law that says what the penalties will be if the state doesn't do what they're supposed to do? I said, boy, that's a really good question. I didn't read anything in the law that says that the state will have to pay $100,000 if they fail to do this, or any specific penalty. So it's not a guarantee that this will happen, but it should help a great deal, especially with Perry Briskin advocating. Next slide. Okay, this doesn't happen that often, but it happens often enough that I've heard some repeated stories about it. There is something in the system called global deactivation, which means that a person was incorrectly deleted from the system. And it sounds like that's most often because they were somehow incorrectly listed as deceased. So if they're listed, if they're globally deactivated, they disappear from the system. But you can help prevent this by asking the CCS if they check periodically for the global deactivation report. They will typically get that report that lists everybody who's about to be globally deactivated, removed from the system. They usually get it 2 or 3 months before the deactivation takes effect. So if the CCS is keeping an eye on that and they contact you and they say, uh-oh, it looks like you're going to be globally deactivated in 2 months, then you've got time to work with the CCS to get that corrected. Contact the DDA regional office and cancel the global deactivation. Next slide. Okay. This is an issue that Perry and I have been collaborating on somewhat. For some reason, there is a glitch in the system. And Perry, after I cover this slide, if you have an update on this that you care to share, please feel free. There's a glitch in the system that has been causing some people who are enrolled in one of the other 6 Medicaid coverage groups, but not the special waiver group, to get notices from the eligibility determination division telling them they need to go through a redetermination with EDD. Now that's incorrect because remember, the EDD waiver unit is only handling redeterminations for people in the special waiver group. They're the only ones they're supposed to be handling. And then a separate division in the eligibility determination division handles redeterminations for the EID group. So if you get a notice that says, we're doing your redetermination, here's the packet, here's the PIN number, and you know that your family member is enrolled in the SSI group or the EID group or the DAC group, then you know that that notice is an error. And what you want to do is, first of all, make sure that you know what your family member's coverage group is. Sometimes people have been incorrectly switched from a different coverage group to the special waiver group, even though that should not have happened. So you want to check, see which group your family member is enrolled in now. And if it is the special waiver group, go ahead and complete the redetermination, but you can contact your CCS and possibly a benefits planner to get help correcting that, getting your family member back into the other Medicaid group they should be in. But if you get that notice that says, okay, we're EDD, we're doing a redetermination, and you verify that your family member is not in the special waiver group, they're in the SSI group or the EID group or the DAC group, then next slide, please. Then you definitely want to contact the EDD case manager and report it and say, look, I got a redetermination notice, but I am not enrolled in the special waiver group. This is my group, and this is the code, S02 or S19 or whatever. And make sure that they know that they do not need to do your redetermination. Okay. And I mentioned that you can get help from a benefits planner to correct an incorrect Medicaid coverage group. And it says, see slide 35. I apologize. It's a later slide that gives you information on how to get access to a benefits planner. We'll get to that momentarily. Next slide, please. So how can you prepare for redeterminations to help avoid problems? Some of the tips we've discussed as fixes to the various problems, but the Word document that you have does have a list of about 10 steps to do to prepare for redeterminations to help avoid problems. And that's assuming your redetermination is for the special waiver group. So your family member is in the special waiver group. Next slide. So here's how you can get free benefits planning. If your family member has a case open with DOORS, the Maryland Division of Rehabilitation Services, and they're getting any public benefits, which would certainly include Medicaid, then DOORS can arrange benefits planning at no cost. If your family member does not have a case open with DOORS, then you can contact the Maryland Work Incentives Network at 240-638-0071. And they can provide you with free benefits planning if your family member receives SSDI or SSI or both, and they're either working or they're actively looking for work. Some people have said, I would rather hire somebody privately and pay them. If that's the case, you can contact Melissa. She has a list of 2 of my excellent colleagues who accept private referrals and have helped people resolve this issue of being in the incorrect coverage group. So to underscore my answer to the previous question that I noted fleetingly in the chat about why do you need to know the coverage group that your family member is enrolled in? Number one, you need to know it so that you know who's supposed to be doing the eligibility determination. And number two, so that if you know that your family member is enrolled in one of the other 6 coverage groups and not in the special waiver group, if you get a notice from the eligibility determination division's waiver unit saying we're doing a redetermination, you know that it's incorrect. And because those redeterminations are the ones that have been fraught with difficulty, if you get that notice and your family member is not in the special waiver group, you want to be sure that you get that corrected so you don't have to deal with the most problematic redetermination. And I think that may be the last slide. Could you please go one forward? Okay, great. Yeah, I did want to acknowledge um, these are all wonderful colleagues who do work for um, coordinators of community services agencies and were really helpful in developing this presentation. So I wanted to acknowledge them in writing. And next slide. Yeah, so that's it. We do have, fortunately, time for questions. Melissa, how would you like to handle these questions?
So I think Patricia has been writing them down. Is that?
Okay.
Yeah, we have 50 of them.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
So
wow.
there are a few. And they were coming fast and furious, so I have them. But I haven't really like gone through them. So I'll go back up to the top and start there.
Okay, Patricia,
And
I'm sorry to interrupt. I did want to see if Perry wanted to.
Perry actually had to leave.
Perry left. Okay.
Yeah, she had to leave for another event.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
so a lot of these are actually comments about people's concerns about the process and how challenging it is. So I'm actually going to move beyond those and really go to some of the questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
There's web submission easier. Um, uh, kind of great idea. Automate. I've been waiting. Da, da, da. What can somebody do? Okay, I've been calling the MDH and DHS numbers and not getting help. My son's login credentials no longer work, and even after we change a password, still says the login failed. But their IT support number is not on the site. Any suggestions? They've sent in the forms. Any suggestions for how to navigate that?
I wish I did. It sounds like you've done everything that you could reasonably do. This is one reason that a paper application may be necessary if you just cannot uh, can't get a problem resolved with using the benefits.maryland.gov site. You've got a technical issue like this. I have heard that people have had difficulty um, getting tech support with that. I do recommend continuing to try it if necessary. Um, I know some of you are retired, many of you are not. Those of you who are retired may have more time to deal with this than those of you who are not. Um, but it's as frustrating and labor intensive and time consuming as this is, you can all appreciate how vitally important it is. And so the various fixes that are scattered throughout this PowerPoint and that are addressed in even greater detail in the accompanying Word document do give you strategies for dealing with these problems and backups. But I don't know of a great foolproof way to get tech support if you've done what you're supposed to do to get tech support with an online issue with benefits.maryland.gov and you just couldn't get it fixed. And I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for that.
There are a lot of those types of concerns and questions and complaints. Basically, that you can't get an answer when you call, you can't get an answer in the portal doesn't work appropriately. And you never know when you submit the paperwork whether or not it has been received. Somebody did offer some advice. They said, I always send the application and documentation registered USPS mail. Someone at the EDD has to sign for it. When they claim they don't have it, I look at the signature and tell them who signed for it and the date and time.
Absolutely. Very good point. It is included in the PowerPoint as well as the Word document. I would say certified mail rather than registered. Registered is, generally if you're insuring something of value, but it's certified and you request a return receipt somebody needs to sign for that. You get a receipt and it is signed just as that commenter said. So thank you for
Yeah.
reinforcing that point.
Okay, a question. Can a disabled individual be in multiple Medicaid coverage programs or groups?
Not at the same time. Excellent question. However, a person may be eligible in more than two groups at a time. They can only be enrolled in one. Why is that important? Because if a person loses eligibility for one group, they may very well be eligible for another one. They could then transition from the first group if they're no longer eligible for it. For example, if they exceed the income limit or the resource limit, they could then, although they've lost eligibility for that group, they could then transition into a different group. If the person is working, it's very common for them to be eligible for the EID group, employed individuals with disabilities, even if they have lost another group.
Okay, next question. The asset limitation applies to all coverage groups. Is that correct?
It does not, and I'm sorry I didn't go into deeper detail, but for one thing, I probably would have put you to sleep if I did, and it would have added a lot of length to this. However, the Word document does include more details about who is eligible and what the income and resource limits are for each of the 7 coverage groups that we addressed. So you can look it up in there. Now, I can tell you that out of those groups, 6 of them have resource limits. The one that does not have a resource limit is the Adult Magi group, also known as the Medicaid Expansion group. And the groups that don't require a disability generally don't have resource limits, just income limits. Every one of the groups has an income limit except for the EID group, which eliminated the income limit on January 1st of 2024. But definitely open up that Word file, and you will find within the first couple of pages a list of the 7 coverage groups and the eligibility, including income and resource limits for each.
Okay. Next one. Some family members are coded incorrectly, and the parents, loved ones don't even know about it. Where within LTSS or any other system should we instruct the CCS to check to make sure that our loved one is properly coded as SO2 and for example, and not AO2 or AO3?
Okay, good question. Now, there actually is, in one of the slides, forgive me, I'm not sure which one it was, but there is in the notes at the bottom of that slide, there are instructions on how the CCS can can find which coverage group your loved one is enrolled in. Just in case your CCS may be fairly new and they don't know the ins and outs of the LTSS system yet. So you'll find those. You didn't see them when I was showing the slides because in the slideshow mode, it doesn't show the notes at the bottom. But in the copy that you have, it's in there. And it's one of the only slides, may even be the only one that has a note at the bottom of it. So you can find it in there. And remember that there are 3 different ways that were highlighted on one slide to determine which coverage group your family member is enrolled in. And if you believe that your family member is enrolled in an incorrect group, they should be in a different group, then I do recommend that you contact a benefits planner for help getting that corrected.
Okay, next question. This is about a gentleman with Down syndrome, age 34, has never needed a redetermination for his HCBS Community Pathways waiver. They've been told it's because he gets SSI. Is it accurate that he doesn't have to do annual determinations, number one? And the second part is, will that change when his dad retires and gets retirement Social Security benefits and starts getting SSDI as a DAC?
Okay, great question. And the answer is that, and this is addressed in one of the earlier slides, for people who get SSI payments, they're automatically eligible for Medicaid, and their redeterminations are not done by the state. They don't get a state Medicaid eligibility redetermination. They will periodically get a redetermination of SSI eligibility from Social Security. And the frequency of those SSI redeterminations by Social Security can be anywhere from once a year to once every 5 or 6 years, depending on the person's circumstances and how likely Social Security thinks it is that the person's eligibility for SSI may change. So Social Security is still supposed to redetermine eligibility for SSI, but the frequency of those redeterminations varies. As long as the redetermination from Social Security shows the person is still eligible for SSI, then they will still be eligible for Medicaid. They will not need a separate Medicaid redetermination. Now, it is common for somebody to start out on SSI benefits, but not end up on SSI. And the questioner posed one very common scenario. Your family member starts out getting SSI, and then they have a parent who starts getting Social Security retirement or Social Security disability, or the parent passes away. And then the disabled son or daughter gets switched from SSI to a form of Social Security disability on the parent's record known as a disabled adult child or DAC benefit. And if that DAC benefit is high enough, it will terminate their SSI. But there is that separate Medicaid group. It was one of the 7 that was listed. It's the DAC, Disabled Adult Child group. And that one continues Medicaid eligibility for someone who started out on SSI, switched to getting the Disabled Adult Child benefit on the parent's record, and lost SSI as a result. And to be eligible for that group, the person simply would have to have circumstances such that if it were not for the DAC benefit, they would still be getting an SSI payment. So they're otherwise eligible for SSI. And if they didn't have that disabled adult child benefit, they would still be getting SSI. Now, a benefits planner can be really helpful if a person is not correctly coded in that DAC group, and the code is S19. It's very common, unfortunately, for people who should be in the DAC group, coded S19, to be incorrectly in a different group, like the special waiver group, which has a code of H01. And as you could see, since the eligibility redeterminations that were the primary focus this evening, that are done by the Eligibility Determination Division's waiver unit, since those have been so difficult and For example, the ARC of Montgomery County initiated a class action lawsuit on behalf of people who were incorrectly terminated because of those problem redeterminations. If you can be sure your family member is in a different Medicaid coverage group, you might be able to save yourself a big headache.
Okay. Next question. This may be incorrect. It says, does 1619 happen automatically? I wonder if that means S19.
Actually, that they meant something called 1619B.
B.
That is the section of the Social Security Act that created a work incentive, a safety net, that I kind of put in a plug for a bit earlier, and that does define one of the 7 Medicaid coverage groups we covered. That's the group for a person who started out on SSI payments, but they were working and their earnings from work went up high enough to reduce their SSI to 0. When that happens, the person can still stay eligible for SSI, which will continue their Medicaid and let them get right back on SSI payments if anything happens to their earnings later, if they drop low enough or they stop working. So 1619B is supposed to be automatic. So as long as the individual is reporting their earnings to Social Security every month, which is what you should do if you get SSI and you're working, and Social Security sees, oh, your earnings are high enough to reduce your SSI to 0. Let's make sure you're still eligible for Medicaid through the 1619B rule. They are supposed to do that automatically, but they're supposed to do a lot of things automatically that they're just too short-staffed to do. So I always recommend that if your family member has earnings that are increasing and they're going to get high enough that their SSI will be 0, that you contact Social Security, generally with the help of a benefits planner, and make sure that your family member gets to stay in the 1619B group and keep their Medicaid.
Okay, Melissa, are we going to continue here? Or are we pausing?
Yeah, let's pause only because the ASL interpreters have to be done at 8:30, and I want to say a few more things before we leave. So Michael, if you want, and what we can do is we can come up with the questions again and I can send them to you. And then we can do what we've done in the past if there's a lot of questions. Also, Patricia, if you want to send me the comments as well, and then I can also share that with Perry as well, with the all of the information that I send to her. So,
Absolutely.
Michael,
Yeah.
thank you so much. As always, for such a wonderful presentation. We are so grateful for your time and your expertise and your dedication that you bring to every presentation and to every time you're here. So thank you so much, Michael, from the
You're
bottom
welcome.
of our
Thank you,
hearts.
Melissa. Thank you.
Yes. All right. And then just a reminder, as Perry said, if you have a loved one who is transitioning and you want to make sure that, everything is okay and they're on the list, please send me a email with their name. I'll put my email again in the chat, but with their name and date of birth and any other information. And if there's anything else you want, you can send it to me if you want to send to Perry. And then lastly, but definitely not, but most importantly, before we go, we would like to give a special shout out to Patricia. Sadly, this will be her last Transition Times webinar as she prepares for her retirement. But we would like to thank you for your years of dedication with MCPS and for all that you have done to make transition time such a valuable resources for families and professionals. Your knowledge, support, and commitment has made a lasting impact, and you will be deeply missed. So we wish you a happy and healthy and well-deserved retirement.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to Michael. Thank you to Margie and Melissa for always running such informative and helpful trainings for families. And thank you to our interpreters. Truly, thank you, everyone. Wishing you all the
Yes.
best.
Of course, and so this is a perfect way to end the night. This will be our last transition times for the 2005-2006 school system. But the good thing is we will be back in September. So look out for the emails. We're going to do another flyer again, and we look forward to seeing everybody in September. Take care. Thank you.